Have you ever felt like you're chasing someone who's already halfway out the door, even while they're holding your hand? That confusion, that ache in your chest, the emotional whiplash, you're not imagining it. You're not crazy. You're dealing with someone who's avoidant. And it's not just frustrating, it's deeply painful. Because just when things start to feel close, real, right, they pull away. They get distant, cold. Maybe they disappear altogether. And you're left wondering what you did wrong. Today, we're going to rip the lid off that experience. We're going to unpack what avoidant people do when you get too close, why they do it, and most importantly, why it hurts so damn much. But here's the twist. This isn't just about them. It's also about you. What's really going on under the surface? Why are you drawn to this pattern, and how do you finally break it? Stay with me, because by the end of this talk, you won't just understand avoidant behavior, you'll understand yourself better than ever before. Let's go. When you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, the dynamic can feel like emotional whiplash. 1 minute, they're warm, engaged, even affectionate. Then suddenly, something shifts. They pull away. They become distant, cold, unresponsive. You might feel blindsided, wondering what just happened. The truth is, you may have gotten too close, and for an avoidant person, closeness doesn't feel like safety. It feels like danger. That's the paradox. Avoidantly attached individuals often crave connection, just like everyone else. They may pursue relationships, fall in love, or initiate intimacy. But as soon as that connection starts to deepen, when emotional intimacy starts to become real and consistent, their nervous system interprets it as a threat. You see, somewhere along the line, they learned that closeness means vulnerability, and vulnerability means risk. Risk of disappointment, risk of being hurt, risk of losing their independence, their sense of control. So even though they may have initiated the closeness, the moment it starts to feel too much, they instinctively pull back. This creates a very distinct push-pull cycle. You get closer, they pull away, you give them space, they come back around, rinse and repeat. It's confusing, it's exhausting, and it can be deeply painful if you don't understand what's really happening beneath the surface. And if you're someone with an anxious attachment style, or someone who simply values closeness and consistency, this dynamic can send your emotions into overdrive. You start trying harder. You try to fix what went wrong. You may blame yourself, but it's not your fault. What you're experiencing is a protective strategy that's been wired into this person's emotional survival system long before you ever came into the picture. So why does this happen? Often, people with avoidant attachment styles grew up in environments where emotional needs weren't consistently met. Maybe they had caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, highly critical, or only responded when they were good, quiet, or self-sufficient. Over time, they learned that meeting others leads to disappointment or worse, rejection. So they adapted by learning to suppress their own needs and rely only on themselves. In adulthood, this shows up as a kind of self-protection mechanism. The moment they feel dependent on someone, or the moment someone gets too close, their subconscious tells them, this isn't safe. Pull away, disconnect, retreat. But here's where it gets really painful for the other person involved. When the avoidant pulls back, they often do it without explanation. They might ghost you, they might suddenly act irritated, withdrawn, or emotionally numb. You're left hanging, hurt, confused, and desperate for answers. You might go over every interaction in your mind, wondering what triggered the shift. Did you say too much? Were you too available? Did you come on too strong? But the truth is, this isn't really about you. It's about the avoidant person's internal wiring. Their need to protect themselves overrides their desire to connect. And because vulnerability feels threatening to them, your emotional openness might be misinterpreted as pressure or control, even when that's not your intention at all. The more you pursue them during this pullback phase, the more they feel smothered. This can trigger them to retreat even further. And that's what makes the push-pull dynamic so maddening. Your instinct may be to move closer when they pull away, but for them, that closeness can feel like suffocation. To complicate things further, once they've created enough distance to feel safe again, many avoidant individuals will re-engage. They'll come back around, they'll reach out as if nothing happened. And because the connections still exist, because they still have feelings, they may reinitiate closeness. And the cycle begins all over again. This intermittent reinforcement, where emotional connection is offered, then withdrawn, then offered again, is powerful. Psychologically, it creates a kind of addiction. Your brain starts to chase the high of closeness, especially after the low of disconnection. You find yourself working harder and harder to get back to that feeling of intimacy. But each time, the cycle leaves you a little more depleted, a little more confused, a little less trusting of yourself. And that's what makes this cycle so toxic if it goes unchecked. It can erode your self-esteem. It can make you question your worth. It can convince you that you're too much or that love always has to hurt. But none of that is true. What's really happening is that you're caught in a dynamic with someone whose defense mechanisms were built to keep people at arm's length. They're not trying to hurt you, but their coping strategies do hurt, especially when you're seeking stability, connection, and emotional reciprocity. Understanding this dynamic doesn't mean you have to accept it, but it does give you clarity. It helps you stop taking their behavior personally. It helps you see the push-pull cycle for what it is, a protective dance driven by fear of intimacy and a need for emotional control. And once you can name the cycle, you can start making different choices. Choices that protect your peace. Choices that keep you from getting pulled into the undertow. Because love should never feel like you're chasing someone just to keep them from disappearing. Emotional intimacy can be one of the most fulfilling experiences in a relationship, but for someone with an avoidant attachment style, it can feel threatening, even suffocating. That might sound strange, especially if you're someone who craves connection. You might assume that everyone wants closeness, that love naturally leads to emotional intimacy. But for avoidant individuals, intimacy often carries hidden risks. Risks they've been trained, sometimes unconsciously, to avoid at all costs. At its core, emotional intimacy means letting someone see the real you. It means being vulnerable, opening up about your fears, your insecurities, your dreams, your past. It means dropping the mask and trusting someone to hold what you reveal without judgment or betrayal. But for avoidant people, this level of exposure can trigger deeply rooted fears, fears that were often formed in childhood. Many avoidantly attached individuals grew up in environments where emotional vulnerability wasn't safe. Maybe their caregivers were distant, dismissive, overly critical, or unpredictable. When they tried to express emotion, they were met with rejection, ridicule, or indifference. So they learned to cope by shutting down, by pulling inward, by becoming self-reliant to a fault. Over time, this coping mechanism hardens into a belief that emotional closeness leads to pain, that needing others makes you weak, that vulnerability is dangerous. So when someone starts to get close, when a relationship moves past the surface and into real emotional territory, those old alarm bells start ringing. Even if they care about you, even if they love you, the internal reaction isn't one of safety or joy. It's one of panic. The walls go up. They might not even be aware of it. It's automatic. Their nervous system goes into defense mode. What feels like closeness to you feels like exposure to them. And exposure in their world has never led to anything good. This is why avoidant individuals often seem to do well in the early stages of a relationship when things are fun and flirty and not too deep. They can be charming, engaging, and even affectionate. But as the emotional stakes rise, as the relationship requires more vulnerability, more emotional availability, they start to back away. Sometimes subtly, sometimes abruptly. You might notice them becoming less responsive, more aloof, distracted, or irritable. You might feel like you're hitting an invisible wall, like something shifted and you can't quite name what it is. They may not even realize they're doing it, but they are distancing themselves from a perceived emotional threat. And this threat isn't necessarily you. It's what you represent, the possibility of being fully seen, the possibility of being emotionally dependent on someone, the possibility of letting someone in far enough that they could hurt them. And even if you've done nothing to warrant that fear, it doesn't matter. The avoidant response isn't rational. It's emotional. It's primal. It's based on past experiences, not present reality. What makes this so difficult for the partner on the receiving end is that it feels personal. You start to question yourself. Did you say too much? Were you too open, too needy, too vulnerable? But the truth is, you likely didn't do anything wrong. What you did was trigger a fear they may not have even known they were carrying. And here's the part that really complicates things. They might not completely withdraw. They might stay in the relationship. They might still care about you, but they keep you at arm's length. You can feel the emotional ceiling. No matter how hard you try, you can't break through it. You're met with avoidance, deflection, or shutdowns every time you reach for deeper connection. And yet they might insist that everything is fine, that nothing's wrong, because in their mind, this distance is safe. This is how they've survived. This fear of intimacy often shows up in subtle behaviors. They might change the subject when things get emotional. They might avoid eye contact during serious conversations. They might minimize your feelings or keep their own tightly guarded. They often struggle to express their emotions. Not because they don't feel them, but because expressing them feels too raw, too exposed. They might even mock vulnerability, seeing it as weakness, not just in you, but especially in themselves. And yet, deep down, many avoidant individuals do long for connection. They want love. They want to be understood, but they've built so many defenses to protect themselves that when love finally shows up, they don't know how to receive it. Their instinct is to retreat, to self-protect. And unless they become aware of this pattern and begin to heal it, they'll continue to sabotage the very closeness they crave. If you're in a relationship with someone like this, it can feel like being locked out of a house with the lights on inside. You can see them, you know they're in there, but no matter how hard you knock, the door never opens all the way. That hurts. It's confusing. It's deeply frustrating because you're offering love and it keeps getting interpreted as danger. Understanding that emotional intimacy feels like a threat to an avoidant person doesn't make their behavior okay, but it does make it make sense. And that understanding can be the first step toward clarity. Clarity about what you need, what you're willing to tolerate, and what kind of emotional reciprocity you truly deserve. One of the most disorienting parts of being close to someone with an avoidant attachment style is the mixed signals. They can be incredibly confusing. One moment they're warm and present, maybe even intensely affectionate, and the next they've gone cold or distant, like someone flipped a switch. This inconsistency isn't just frustrating, it's painful. You never know where you stand. You never know what version of them you're going to get. And the emotional roller coaster it creates can leave you second-guessing yourself, overanalyzing every conversation, and questioning your own worth. The reason these mixed signals are so common in avoidant behavior is that avoidant individuals often live in a constant internal tug-of-war. On one side, they want connection. They care. They might even crave closeness more than they admit. But on the other side, they fear it. They associate closeness with risk, vulnerability, and a loss of control. So what you see on the outside, their unpredictable behavior, is just the visible surface of an intense internal conflict. They are drawn to you and scared of you at the same time, not because of who you are, but because of what you represent: emotional exposure. So you might get moments where they're deeply engaged, opening up, showing affection, initiating contact, making plans. These moments feel like breakthroughs, like proof that things are deepening. But then, almost without warning, they pull back. They become vague, non-committal, distracted. Their messages slow down, their tone changes. And because it feels so sudden, so jarring, you start to wonder what you did. The truth? You likely did nothing wrong. It's just that the closeness started to register as too much for them. This is how the avoidant sends mixed signals. Not necessarily out of manipulation, but out of self-protection. They often don't know how to maintain emotional consistency because consistency requires vulnerability. It means showing up fully, even when it's uncomfortable. But avoidant individuals are wired to retreat from discomfort. So instead of moving through it, they escape. And that escape can look like silence, sarcasm, dismissiveness, or even ending conversations before they get too deep. Another layer to the mixed signals is how they communicate, or more accurately, how they don't communicate. Avoidants often struggle to express their emotional needs clearly. Instead of saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed," or "I need a little space to process," they might just disappear for a bit. Instead of acknowledging fear, they act indifferent. Instead of owning their discomfort, they blame it on being busy or tired or stressed. This avoidance of direct communication is part of how they protect themselves from emotional exposure. But for you on the receiving end, it feels like you're being shut out for no reason. This lack of emotional clarity creates a minefield of doubt. You start to question what's real. Did they mean what they said the other day? Are they still into you? Are you imagining things? You may find yourself trying to decode their behavior, reading into texts, trying to interpret silences, replaying conversations. It's exhausting, and the inconsistency keeps you hooked because every time they come close again, it gives you just enough hope to stay. It feels like proof that things can be good, that maybe the emotional distance was temporary, but then it happens again, and you're back in the loop. This cycle creates a psychological phenomenon known as intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that keeps people pulling slot machines. The reward doesn't come consistently, but when it does, it feels amazing, and that unpredictability makes it even more addictive. In a relationship with an avoidant, the occasional moments of warmth, affection, or vulnerability act as rewards. They pull you back in, making you feel like the connection is worth fighting for. But between those highs are long stretches of uncertainty, distance, and confusion. And over time, that pattern can quietly erode your self-worth. What's even more difficult is that avoidant individuals may not even realize they're doing this. They don't necessarily intend to hurt you. In their mind, they might believe they're being perfectly reasonable, that they're just not ready for something serious or that they need space. And because they're often not in touch with their own emotional landscape, they might genuinely not understand why they keep pulling back. They may frame it as needing independence, when in reality they're just terrified of being emotionally dependent on anyone. So what you're experiencing is not someone playing games with you. It's someone whose nervous system sees intimacy as danger. It's someone whose internal alarm bells go off the moment things start to feel real. And their behavior, the inconsistency, the mixed messages, is how they try to stay close enough to not lose the relationship, but far enough to not feel too exposed. It's a delicate, exhausting dance, and it's one that often leaves you carrying all the emotional weight. Understanding this doesn't mean you have to accept the behavior or stay in the dynamic, but it does give you clarity. It allows you to stop personalizing their unpredictability. It helps you stop blaming yourself for their emotional avoidance. And that clarity is the first step toward protecting your own peace, setting boundaries, and recognizing the kind of connection that isn't just intense or exciting, but safe, steady, and mutual. Because real love isn't a guessing game. It doesn't leave you in limbo. And you deserve more than someone who only shows up when it's convenient or safe for them. When you're in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, the pain you feel when they pull away is often much deeper than the behavior itself. It's not just that they stop texting for a few days, or that they changed the subject when things got emotional. It's the way those actions hit your nervous system hard and fast, like a punch to the chest. That pain, that internal panic, isn't random. It's your attachment system being triggered. And once it's activated, it can hijack your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in a way that feels overwhelming and out of your control. The attachment system is a biological mechanism we all have. It's built into us from the time we're babies. It's what drives us to seek closeness, safety, and connection with others, especially the people we care most about. When those connections feel secure, our nervous system stays regulated. We feel calm, grounded, emotionally balanced. But when there's distance, unpredictability, or disconnection, especially with someone we're emotionally invested in, the attachment system starts to sound the alarm. For someone with an anxious or even just secure attachment style, being close to an avoidant partner can be especially destabilizing. Because avoidants tend to send mixed signals, withdraw emotionally, or resist deeper intimacy. It keeps your attachment system in a constant state of activation. You never fully relax. You're always waiting for a reply, for a sign, for reassurance that things are okay. And the more they pull away, the more your system screams at you to do something to bring the connection back. That's why you might find yourself overthinking, texting repeatedly, trying to have the talk again and again. Not because you're needy or dramatic, but because your attachment system is doing exactly what it's designed to do: reestablish closeness with someone who matters to you. But when that closeness is denied or inconsistently offered, it creates emotional chaos. You may feel panic, sadness, anger, confusion, often all at once. Your self-esteem starts to erode. You begin to internalize their distance as a reflection of your worth. If they're pulling away, maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe if I just tone it down or give them more space or prove I'm safe, they'll stop withdrawing. This self-blame isn't logical, it's survival. It's your brain trying to make sense of emotional inconsistency by turning it into a solvable problem. If you are the issue, then you can fix it and the connection won't be lost. But here's the truth. The pain you feel in these moments isn't about neediness. It's about disconnection. It's about being emotionally invested in someone who isn't emotionally available. And when your efforts to connect are met with distance or indifference, the rejection hits not just your heart, it hits your nervous system like a trauma response. That's why you feel so triggered. That's why it's so hard to let go, even when you know the dynamic is hurting you. Your brain starts chasing the connection like it's a lifeline, because on a primal level, it is. This cycle is even more intense because it's unpredictable. You never know when they'll pull away or when they'll come back. This keeps your attachment system constantly scanning for danger. You start to interpret every little thing, how long it takes them to reply, the tone of a text, a change in behavior, as a potential threat. Your sense of emotional safety becomes tied entirely to their mood, their presence, their affection, and when that's taken away, even briefly, it can feel like abandonment. What makes this dynamic even more painful is that it's often invisible to the avoidant person. They might think they're just taking space or staying independent. They're not aware that their withdrawal is activating a full-blown emotional crisis in you. And unless they've done deep work on themselves, they may not see how their behavior triggers old wounds, especially if you have a history of emotional inconsistency or abandonment in your past. If you've ever been with someone who goes cold the moment things start to feel real, you know this pain well. It's not just disappointment, it's disorientation. It makes you question what's real. Was the connection you felt genuine? Did they mean it when they said they cared? How can someone be so present one moment and so distant the next? That emotional confusion is what hurts the most. And when you're constantly trying to make sense of someone else's avoidance, you start to lose your own clarity. You lose touch with your needs, your instincts, even your boundaries. The worst part? This pain is often invisible to everyone else. To the outside world, it may look like a minor relationship issue, like they just needed space or weren't ready. But internally, you might be going through emotional hell, because it's not just about losing a person, it's about feeling emotionally unsafe, unseen, and unimportant. And that pain isn't something you can just rationalize away. It sits in your body. It lives in your nervous system. And it echoes every time you try to get close and get pushed away. Understanding that this is your attachment system being hijacked is the first step toward healing. It helps you stop blaming yourself for reacting so strongly. It helps you understand that the pain isn't proof you're broken, it's proof that you're wired for connection. And while that wiring can lead you into painful patterns, it can also lead you out if you start choosing relationships where emotional safety isn't something you have to fight for, but something that's freely given. One of the most emotionally draining and destabilizing patterns that often emerges in relationships with avoidant individuals is the cycle of push and pull. This isn't something that happens just once. It's a repeating pattern, a loop that slowly wears you down. The avoidant partner pulls you in just close enough to keep you emotionally invested, only to push you away when things start to feel too intimate or real. It's a hot and cold dynamic that creates confusion, instability, and often deep emotional exhaustion. At the beginning, it might seem like things are going great. The avoidant may appear charming, attentive, and even vulnerable. They may show a genuine interest in connecting. But as the relationship begins to deepen, when real intimacy starts to develop, they begin to feel overwhelmed. Emotional closeness, for them, often feels like a threat. It makes them feel trapped, exposed, or suffocated. Their instinct is to retreat, to create distance, to regain control over their emotional environment. So they push you away. This can take many forms, becoming emotionally unavailable, withdrawing communication, picking fights, or creating subtle friction that makes you question where things stand. They might start to emphasize their need for space or talk about not wanting anything too serious, even if their earlier actions suggested otherwise. The emotional energy between you suddenly shifts and you're left wondering what happened. The push is painful. It activates your attachment system. You begin scrambling for reassurance, trying to reconnect, to fix whatever you think went wrong. You might reach out more, try to have heartfelt conversations, or downplay your own needs just to avoid pushing them further away. And just when you've reached a point of emotional depletion, just when you've begun to consider stepping back, they pull you in again. This pull isn't necessarily grand or dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as a kind text out of the blue, a compliment, an apology, or a small act of affection. It's just enough to reignite your hope. You think, maybe they do care. Maybe we're getting back to that good place. And for a brief moment, it feels like the relationship is healing. You let your guard down, you re-engage, you reinvest, and then it happens again. They start to pull away, and the cycle repeats. This cycle becomes addictive. It creates a pattern of emotional highs and lows that mimic the neurochemical effects of intermittent rewards. The uncertainty, followed by a brief emotional payoff, floods your brain with dopamine, making the good moments feel intoxicating, stronger than they would in a stable relationship. But this kind of emotional unpredictability isn't romantic or passionate. It's psychologically manipulative, even if it's unintentional. It keeps you stuck in a dynamic where your emotional well-being is always dependent on someone else's availability. The damage this cycle does is deep. Over time, it trains you to doubt your own needs. You begin to believe that asking for consistency is asking for too much. You learn to suppress your feelings to avoid rocking the boat. You start managing your behavior, your tone, your timing, hoping that if you can just get it right, they won't withdraw again. You may even begin to associate love with anxiety, thinking that this roller coaster is proof of a deep connection. But real connection doesn't leave you constantly bracing for impact. Real connection feels safe, even in its vulnerable moments. The push-pull cycle also erodes trust, not just in them, but in yourself. You lose confidence in your instincts. When someone repeatedly pulls you in and pushes you away, it creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. You're constantly torn between what they do and what they say. You start to feel emotionally gaslit, not in an overt, malicious way, but in a subtle, ongoing way that makes you question your perception of reality. One moment they seem fully present and emotionally engaged, and the next they act like they never really signed up for this connection. That inconsistency makes you feel crazy. It keeps you stuck trying to decode their behavior when really the pattern is the message. It's important to understand that people who behave this way are often not intentionally trying to hurt you. They are usually acting from their own deeply embedded fears. They may not have the tools or awareness to process emotional intimacy in a healthy way. Their avoidance isn't always calculated, it's reflexive. But that doesn't mean you have to stay caught in the cycle. Understanding their fear doesn't mean you have to excuse the emotional fallout it causes. Recognizing this pattern for what it is the first step toward breaking free from it. It takes courage to step back and acknowledge that the dynamic is not serving your emotional health. It takes clarity to see that emotional whiplash is not love. And it takes self-respect to decide that you deserve more than being kept in emotional limbo. You deserve a connection that doesn't disappear the moment things get real. You deserve steady love, consistent presence, and honest communication. You deserve to be with someone who doesn't just pull you close when it's convenient, but stays close when it counts. Because real intimacy isn't a game of push and pull. It's a mutual decision to stay present, even when it's hard. One of the most overlooked and misunderstood aspects of being in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style is the silent, gradual toll it takes on your self-worth. It doesn't usually happen all at once. It's not a loud betrayal or a single moment of rejection. It's slow, quiet, and insidious, like a constant drip of uncertainty that seeps into your mind and convinces you that the problem must be you. At first, you don't see it that way. You make excuses for their behavior. You tell yourself they're just not ready or that they've been hurt before. You see their withdrawal, their lack of emotional availability, and their discomfort with intimacy as wounds that you can heal if you just love them enough, if you just stay patient enough, and you do love them deeply. So you begin to accommodate. You tiptoe around difficult conversation. You shrink your needs down to bite-sized pieces. You tell yourself you're being understanding, flexible, compassionate. But over time, that flexibility starts to bend you out of shape. You stop asking for consistency because it always seems to scare them off. You stop expressing when you feel hurt because they shut down when confronted. You silence your voice to protect the fragile thread of connection you're holding on to. You lower your expectations, not because you want less, but because you've been taught subtly and repeatedly that wanting more is a threat to the relationship, a threat to their comfort, a threat to your connection. So you settle, not because you lack value, but because the dynamic convinces you that your value is too much. That's how your self-worth begins to erode. Not from someone explicitly saying you're unworthy, but from the emotional landscape they create where your needs are always too loud, your feelings are always too intense, and your desire for closeness always feels like a burden. Over time, this changes the way you see yourself. You start to believe that maybe if you were more chill, more easygoing, more independent, things would be different. Maybe if you weren't so emotional. Maybe if you didn't care so much. Maybe then they'd stay. This self-doubt creeps into every corner of your identity. You question whether your intuition is overreacting. You stop trusting your gut. You begin to lose clarity on what a healthy relationship even looks like. And when you find yourself crying alone, wondering why someone who says they care can so easily retreat, you start to blame yourself. That internal blame becomes a loop. It repeats until it becomes your default setting. What did I do wrong? The most tragic part of this erosion is how invisible it can be to the outside world. You may appear confident, capable, put together, but inside you're carrying the weight of emotional rejection that you can't even fully explain. You're grieving a connection that never had space to grow and mourning the parts of yourself you silenced to keep the peace. And maybe you don't talk about it because it feels small, because they didn't leave in some dramatic, obvious way, because they're a good person, just emotionally unavailable. But emotional unavailability isn't harmless. It teaches you to contort yourself just to receive crumbs of closeness. It teaches you that your emotional needs are inconvenient. And that is never okay. The truth is, being close to an avoidant partner often teaches you to betray yourself. Not through obvious choices, but through the tiny daily decisions where you choose silence over expression, over functioning, over receiving, and survival over self-worth. And because those betrayals are self-inflicted, they're harder to notice, but they're no less damaging. Each time you ignore your needs, each time you rationalize their distance, you're unconsciously saying, I'll be whatever you need me to be, just please don't leave. But that need to be chosen should never cost you your identity. Love should not require you to abandon yourself. And emotional safety should never be something you have to earn. The greatest damage an avoidant dynamic can do isn't just in how it hurts. It's in how it quietly convinces you to tolerate being hurt. That shift in your internal compass, where red flags start to feel normal and emotional distance starts to feel like home, is where the deepest pain lives, not about them anymore. It's about the version of yourself you've become in order to hold on to them. The healing doesn't begin by blaming them. It begins by noticing how you've adapted to the emotional deprivation. It begins when you say no more, when you choose self-respect over the comfort of familiar pain, when you stop chasing someone else's half-hearted presence and start reclaiming your own full one. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were never the problem. Your longing for connection is not a flaw. It's human. It's beautiful. And in the right hands with someone emotionally available and willing to grow, it will be honored, not avoided. So let this be the beginning of your return to yourself, to your voice, to your truth, to the kind of love that doesn't diminish you but sees you, hears you, and stays. You deserve nothing less. So here's the truth, the one that's hard to swallow but necessary to hear. Love should not feel like chasing, fixing, or proving. If being close to someone constantly leaves you feeling confused, unseen, or not enough, that's not love. It's survival mode. Being entangled with someone who pulls away the moment things get real can make you question everything, your worth, your instincts, even your sanity. But the pain you've been feeling isn't because you're broken or too much. It's because your heart keeps trying to connect with someone who's emotionally unavailable. And that disconnect, it doesn't define you. It doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means you're trying to build a deep relationship with someone who fears depth. You are wired for connection, for intimacy, for truth, and none of that is something to apologize for. What hurts isn't just the distance they create, but the distance you've created from yourself trying to hold on. But now, you see the pattern. And with that awareness comes power, the power to stop chasing clarity in someone else and start creating it within yourself. You don't need to keep proving you're worthy. You already are. What you need now is the courage to choose peace over chaos, self-respect over survival, and love that feels safe over love that feels like walking on eggshells. You're not here to be someone's emotional testing ground. You're here to be fully seen, fully met, and fully loved. So if you've been shrinking, doubting, or holding your breath for someone to finally show up, exhale and walk away if you need to. Not to hurt them, but to come home to you. That's where the healing starts, and that's where the real love lives.